Going live now.
Thank you, Ash. Welcome everyone to this evening's FBS chat. So, my esteemed guests, Linda, Gil, and Laura, and we're talking today about the importance of family therapy and why maybe that's something that needs to happen more often. I know when I was working in a school setting, I often worked with the young people, but there was always a bit of the puzzle missing. And it always, so from that we transitioned into family work. And for me, felt, it felt like coming home. It felt so much more useful. Um, so maybe we can start with Linda. I mean, I know you've trained lots of counselors in school settings. Um, where does the family side of the work come in, and why is it important?
Well, thank you, Joe. I think when I was a school counselor, it always came in handy when I'd have a student that was upset about something going on at home, for example, and I'd be talking with them in my office, and I'd often ask, does your mom, your dad, your grandma, do they know what's going on? No, 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 no. So what difference would it make if they knew? Oh, I don't know. And with their permission, I would often call parents or grandparents and ask them to come in, and we'd have a family session at school. And what I would find is that usually, in private practice, it might take several sessions, although in the school setting, I was limited. I could maybe have a 30-minute conversation, and it would open up the conversation to the parents. The hierarchy, you might say, is what family therapists call it, to where the hierarchy kind of began to see maybe what they might begin to do that would make a difference for their son or daughter. And I found that was always just invaluable. A lot of times parents were working very hard outside, and really may not have had a lot of contact with the school or even inquired what was going on at school. And this gave them some ideas about what could begin to be helpful. And that's pretty much all we focused on. What could we begin to do is together today in our session that would make a difference for your son, daughter, etc. And that's my dog. But anyway, so that's what I saw as I always found that valuable. And I was mentioning before we went on that as a family therapist in school setting, beginning to see that the school is a system, and I might see a student for a little while, but then I send them back to the system that often helped to create the issue. So I learned very quickly that I needed to involve the system, which often made to where I would not have to see that student again, and to join in with a little bit of conversation on how to begin to help that student do things a little bit differently. So long answer to your question, but
No.
Hope it was, yeah.
It's interesting because we do a lot of work in schools, and sometimes the parents are not even aware that their child's been referred to us.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think it's really important that we make that initial call to ask the parents, so what are your hopes from this work together?
Yes.
What are you hoping to see?
Yes.
What is your child telling you about school? Because that's, most young people, half of their lives at school and half of their lives at home.
Yeah.
And the two can work brilliantly together. So when you did that family work, did you find that there was, because often what we hear is the parents are not engaged with the school, or some parents feel all I get is bad news, so they almost pull away.
Oh, sure. When I would make the phone call, it was crucial that I would say something to them like, your daughter's given me permission to call. I always ask permission. And I see you as the experts on your daughter, and I'd like to invite you, I use that word, to a conversation just for 30 minutes in the morning when you drop her off. I'd always be cautious about the time I asked, and I promise that will not take longer than 30 minutes. And so, right, I think it's how you contact them. Too many times it's, your kid's got a problem, you need to come to school. That is so not right. It's so not respectful. So getting them there was the first thing. And then honestly, I often started off with talking to them about the things that they really appreciated about their son or daughter. And I talk about the same things. And then I might even look at the kid and say, what do you appreciate about your parents? Something like that. where we kind of got off on that foot first, and then we talked about maybe there was something going on at school, and or I know one particular example was a young girl who was acting out constantly, and so when I brought her in to the session with her mom and dad and asked what their best hopes were, they were surprised, that they were coming in, and they said, well, we want her to do better in school. And I asked the young girl, I said, what are your best hopes? And she said, Linda, I just want my dad to get a job because I'm so worried that, we're not going to have anything to eat. And the parents were like, what? They had no idea. She knew that he was struggling with finding a job, but she did. Kids are like little, barometers. They know when pressure's up. And sometimes saying to the parents, what would you like to tell your daughter, in here, so that maybe she begins to see that that's not something that she needs to worry about as much. And they did that. And I did a lot of things like that parents were just not aware that kids were bringing things to school with them that were bothering them. So yeah, but you're right. Getting them there was the tough part, but it's how you do it I do see them as experts, and I tell them that.
Yeah. And I think when you say to them, look, you're experts and your information will be invaluable, it's almost like you've broken down that barrier, haven't you?
Yes, it really is. And and also what's really interesting too is when I shared with them that I was actually a therapist in addition to counselor, and they said, so we're not paying for this? I said, no, you're not paying for this. This is something that you just get to do. And they were like, wow, we can do it at school. And so he was always helpful to do it.
Brilliant. Laura, family therapy. Why do we think it's important? How do we involve the hard to reach, I guess?
Yeah, and that's a really big question at the moment, Joe, which I'm trying to work on, because I think family therapy can feel slightly intimidating for some people, being with a therapist and having the family there and talking. I think we also underestimate as therapists how we do a lot of talking probably, and we're used to it, but a lot of people have never been in a room together and talked about certain things that might be going on for their families and or expressed hopes for their own families. And I think being what Linda said about being the expert, they're also the expert on their own families, not just their children, but they are the experts of their own families. And focusing on that, again, sort of as an introduction, is really, really helpful. I think talking to schools, I work with schools a lot, as Linda does in the UK. So getting the schools to buy into it a bit and finding out what it is and how it can benefit can then do a bit of a trickle down effect, and getting sort of certain people in the schools to talk to families who are harder to reach, and introducing them to the idea of a conversation. I think a conversation is a nice way of putting it. And I do a lot, as Linda, obviously Linda is more expert than me, but I combine solution focus and family therapy together. And I think the advantages of that are, well, firstly, the actual sort of coming together and talking in a room and having a conversation about things that might not be talked about at home, and difficult things that they're experiencing, and having somebody to hold that space, I think, is invaluable. And that's what the feedback I have. I feel so much better. We feel so much better after coming. We managed to speak. I think that's one of the massive achievements of families, is that they manage to speak to each other and get somewhere. And I think that's where the magic starts. And then when they see they've got somewhere, they'll take another risk and another risk, and it can be magic. So I don't know if that really answered your question, but
no, it does. And just listening to the both of you when you were saying that having that space and having that being able to have that conversation in hopefully a relatively safe space, it's surprising how often we hear from parents that I never knew my child felt that way, or I never knew that this was something that was going on for them. So just having that space, it's amazing what what young people come up with, and how amazing they are at looking at, you know, a way forward almost. So yeah, that's been one of the beauties of working with the families, is that moment where the parents look at the child and think, shit, I didn't know that was happening for you.
Yeah, and Joe, I think what you just said is so important because, we could maybe call up a parent and say, your son or daughter really needs you to do so and so, but that's me. But it's very different when you're in the room with parents and the kid, and you encourage the kid to say, what is it that your parent could begin to do on a small scale that would make a difference for you? So you got up in the morning and went to school. I mean, then they talk. As a parent myself, I'm going to listen more to my kid than I am somebody else. And I think that's always been something that I've appreciated about it.
That's really interesting as well, because I know I've got an infinite amount of patience for other people's children. Do you find that, guys? You know what I mean? So yeah, I get that completely. Gil, what are your thoughts?
Family therapy rocks. Well, why family therapy? Well, one, it's pretty much a given that all behavior is contextual.
Yep.
We're responding to context, interpersonal and physical, and also sort of well established as an example. There's so many cases of really bad kids being sent to residential treatment. And if it's a well-run residential treatment program, the kid's behavior improves fairly quickly. Now, there are badly run residential treatment programs. That's another animal. But if it's well-run, kids' behavior improves fairly quickly and stays fairly well improved. Then they're sent home and they relapse very quickly because nothing has changed in their family of origin or in their immediate community. Now, I've looked at research and comparing family therapy and individual therapy. Excuse me, I've got, for viewers out there, listeners, I have a little bit of a cold, so be patient with me. Now, the research and the meta-analysis really kind of mixed about whether family therapy is more effective than individual. But my one let's say interpretation of why that's mixed is to do family therapy. It takes a unique skill set. It is a paradigm shift, and you can't just take your skills at doing individual therapy and just I'm gonna do individual therapy with families. It's a whole different way of thinking, and so I'm thinking maybe in those studies, the people doing the family therapy weren't necessarily highly skilled and qualified in doing family therapy. But like I said, I just do know that kids that go from residential treatment back home pretty much have a very high relapse rate.
Yeah.
Linda and Joe, you made some reference earlier about what's in the two important contexts for kids is their family and school. And something I've been doing for the last 15 years during the school year, 1 day a week at an agency here in Columbus, Ohio, doing live supervision with second-year social work graduate students, and which has just been a lot of fun to do over the years. But one thing I listened for in that first session is, are the behaviors problematic where? At school and or home? Sometimes it's both, sometimes it's one or the other. So that tells me when it's one or the other, it tells me it's contextual.
Yeah.
And you need to address that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And often if the problems are at school, they manifest themselves at home.
Right.
And vice versa, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
And
So
then somebody you mentioned about taking problems from home into school, something that I think everybody's gotten very sensitive to these days is, in education, is trauma-informed education.
Yeah.
And so I think finally we've come to an appreciation in recent years that so many kids, at-risk kids, are experiencing trauma at home, and when they go to school, their brains are all jazzed up, and so they're having trouble paying attention or staying in their seat, or they're acting out because of how the morning started, or maybe what happened the night before.
Yeah. And teachers who don't know what's going on think they're just being out of line and discipline them, or get on their case, and that makes things worse for them, and they act out worse. So it's
re-traumatizing.
It is. It really can be without them knowing.
Yeah.
Laura, you must have seen that in your previous job so many times.
So many times.
I mean, that would have been like a daily occurrence, wouldn't it?
Daily occurrence. And I think also it's quite key to say that family therapy is also labeled as systemic therapy. So it can be used in systems, any systems, in workplaces, in the school, and that's what I do a lot of. I work with the school and family maybe and the young person. So the fact that you can use it in a context, the same training that you do in family therapy can be used in any context, which is again really beneficial for different.
And I think you just answered Mark's question there, Laura. Casually, just fit it in there. Yeah. But yeah, absolutely.
Well, let's address Mark's question, because I think that's an important one. Family therapy, usually equated with family systems theory, and the original development solution focused therapy by Steve DeShazer and Sue Berg and their team was systemic. But I have the sense that nowadays there are a lot of people who get trained in solution focused therapy and are very good at it, but they aren't necessarily grounded in systemic family systems theory.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But the two could go hand in hand so well, because that way, everybody's best hopes can be elicited at first, and then you can ask if they're different ones, where shall we start? The model can really guide us, but it's, like Laura was saying, you got to be comfortable with lots of people in the room, and that's not always easy. But I think if you can look at them as if they're co-therapists to you, helping you to really kind of, help you understand, what needs to begin to happen so things get better. That's sometimes things that you would never know until you're in there in the room with it. So
go ahead, Joe.
Sorry, I was just going to say. So when, oh God, there's so many questions. In terms of the systems theory, which I know very little about, but I know that when I work with a family and they're all there, so rather than imagining someone doing something different, the person's actually in the room. So I can say, if this were to happen, what difference would it make to you? Isn't that about like one change can make a difference to the whole system?
Right.
Have I got that right?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. That family therapy, they're different. Like the evidence-based approaches, a couple of the most popular are multi-systemic therapy and functional family therapy. And then there's brief strategic family therapy and multidimensional family therapy. And I mentioned before we went on air that I'm co-developer of something called Integrated Family Systems Treatment. And I and my 4 collaborators in developing that, we looked at the research on this and found they're all equally effective. What do they have in common? So IFAS, as we refer to it, is organized around the common factors. And we say it's strength-based. Because like multi-systemic therapy, MST, works pretty much just with the parents. Whereas functional family therapy and brief strategic family therapy want to work with whoever's living in the household. Multidimensional family therapy has individual work with the adolescent. It focuses on adolescents, mostly adolescent substance abuse, and then the parents, who then brings them together. But they're all equally effective. So if you're looking at it through a systems lens, if you work with just a caregiver And we have to say caregiver, not just a parent, because so many kids are raised by grandparents or foster care, et cetera, et cetera. If you make a shift there and they stick with it, then it will have a ripple effect throughout the rest of the family system. Don't get me started, Joe. I'm sorry. I don't want to dive into it. I could go on and on.
I just because you said earlier, Gil, that family therapy takes a unique skill set. So what are these? And this is a question for everyone. What are these unique skill sets that we need to know?
Well, I've been talking too much the last few minutes. I'll keep my mouth shut for a minute here.
I think you have to learn how to, for example, when families bring in kids and they say she's the issue, she's the reason we're here, which is typical at times, is to begin to look at everyone and see everyone as collaborators in how the problem has emerged. I think it's important to look at it that way. And in the same sense, they will be the collaborators who help the problem to shrink. And I think I know for me, when I'm working with a family, what I have to remind myself is that I can never identify the identified client in my office. In fact, I'll call on them last, and talk to the parents first, siblings first, before I'll ever call on the client that was, quote, the reason we came. And I just think too that it is having the system in there is what's going to help change happen quicker. But it has to be. We also have to make sure, I think another skill is not to align with any one person. We must stay very neutral and at least in solution focus. That's not too hard to do, because we're looking at people, not problems. But staying very neutral and making sure that, at least being solution focused, that is the family that builds the preferred future together. And just making sure that it's not just the mom who's so upset with the teenager, it's the teenager who also contributes to what the preferred future would look like. Getting every person in the room's input. You have to do that, I think, to be the most successful with it. So that would be a skill set I would say you have to have.
One thing they teach you in family therapy training, which is very, very thorough, is the importance of the therapist being reflective. So I would say half of the training in the UK anyway is about how does the therapy have an impact on the therapist? What does the therapist do about that? How do you talk about it? Making sure you have sessions with your supervisor, and in training you have group supervision, so you talk about the issues. There are themes obviously will have an impact on the therapist, maybe that they've experienced the same sort of issues, and that will have an impact on them, and how do they deal with that when they're in the therapy room. So dealing with those sorts of things is a big thing, and it does take a skill to be reflexive. And if you're not reflexive enough, then you're out. So you do have to learn to get that skill perfected. And it's great because you learn so much about yourself whilst you do it as well. You can be very surprised by what hits you and has an impact on you.
We all bring our own families of origin into the therapy session. We all come from families.
So it's I think you're talking about transference, Laura, when you were mentioning that. And so we have to we talk to our students, and sometimes I've had students come running out of a session in our clinic. It's at the university, and say, "This just happened to me. It's the same thing that this person just described. I don't know what to do with it." So we talk about it. And sometimes they'll say, "Well, should I refer?" No, we're not going to refer. We're going to process this and find a way for you to separate yourself from what's going on with the other people in the room. And so I mean, that truly has to be a skill at times. And I know for me at times when it happens, it would be like, okay, that client's coming in. I'll take my notepad and write across in big letters, "This is not about you." And session. This is not you. So, and that keeps me, you know, focused on what's going on. You have to become very, how should I say that? I don't know what word I'm looking for. Independent, I guess. In that. So
I think also with family therapy, there's a lot of theory, and the theory is really, really important. There's a lot of reading. It can be quite academic, but if you get too stuck into that, you don't become proactive as being a therapist. So that's another skill. You have to balance both of those things. Theory is very important, but having an engagement with the family, bearing in mind all your theoretical knowledge. You know, you have to bring all those pieces together. So that's another skill I would say that is very important.
Yeah, and another skill I would say is, again, we're dealing with relationships. You know, there's a sort of a basic tenet in family therapy is the family is the client, not the identified patient or client. The family is your client. So something you need to learn to do on process rather than content. And the family's content is, which is really their story, which usually involves, at least in the beginning, blaming other family members for the problem. And so it's who's right and wrong. And this gets into a use of self and being reflective. Oftentimes, they'll just naturally, they're humans. They'll try to bring you in and get you to take their side against the other family members. You know, they mean well. They're not being bad. That's what they do. And our job is to not do that. In my mind, the only time to really get into we ask about content. We track content to keep the conversation going. But we're really paying attention to how they relate to each other and how they respond to each other. The only time to really put that aside when there's issues of safety, of abuse of some kind. And then our focus is on safety rather than therapy. Which is, you know, ensuring safety is one of the ingredients in the Therapeutic Alliance. The research is found by Myrna Friedlander and her research team. They've been doing lots of research on the Therapeutic Alliance and couples and family therapy. So ensuring therapy is very, very important.
I think Scott Miller's done the same thing, Gil, with his work. You know, talking about, you know, what makes a great therapist, whether family therapist or individual. And you could put a seasoned one who's done it forever and a new one next to each other. They could easily have the same outcome.
Yeah.
What's integral to both of it is that they have a relationship with the clients.
Right.
So it's always that.
And always that's the foundation of all therapy of any kind. Therapeutic Alliance.
And we've spoke about this a few times, Gil, about that how much of the relationship that the client has with their therapist, helper, counselor, whatever you want to call it, how vital that is. Because me and Ayse work with families and invite whoever wants to come along. Sometimes there are people missing that you think may have had a good input, but that were not there. So what we tend to find in this family, there's in the SF parlance, is you have a customer, you have a visitor, you have a complainant, and you might have all three in the same group.
Exactly.
You know, and generally with us, it's the parent. Things need to change because I cannot cope with this anymore. And you know, the child sometimes is, well, if someone else did something different, then I would do something different, and that's where I guess it becomes tricky. So how do we cope with that in a way that's, I guess, useful? Because you often the young person might be on his phone and it feels like they're not even listening to the conversation.
Actually, to add to that, Joe, usually, not always, when the second parent is there, the second parent will look at us like it's the other parent's fault. they talk too much, or they don't listen, or they know whatever it might be, and they're sitting there all quiet but giving us the look. Look in that direction. Look in that direction. And yeah, I mean, how? I know how we manage that, but how do you manage that?
Well, we talk about the importance of the therapeutic alliance. Well, what really, we're dealing with relationships and interactional patterns. So really, one thing that needs to improve is the relationship between the caregiver and the child with the identified problem. And one of the basic tenets of IFAST is we want to empower at least one caregiver to be the person to solve the kid's problem. We don't want the therapist to be a better therapist than the parent. So the focus is on really working with the parent to change how they respond to the child's problem behavior. And every therapeutic theory that, like Laura referred to, learning different theories, every theory that's of family therapy theory, one way or another addresses that. They have different ways of doing it, different types of interventions, but they all focus on that one way or another. And I'm sorry, Linda, I stepped on your opening line, so I'm sorry.
That's okay, no problem. Yeah, you were mentioning, Asha, that you have families come in, or a parent comes in and the kid's on his phone, and I think one of the things that I've learned over the years of doing this all the time was you've got to find a way to cooperate with everybody in the room. I mean, maybe that's just my solution-focused hat that never goes off, but very quickly tell you a little story about a mom who had called me and wanted her to bring her daughter in, who had been a good student in school, but suddenly at 13 just fell off the wagon and just was getting involved with the wrong people. Said, can I bring her in? I said, yes. And so she did. She got to our clinic, and the girl wouldn't get out of the car. And so she comes in and says, come help me get her out of the car. I said, I can't do that. But just would you let her know that if she could she just come in for 10 minutes, just 10 minutes. And so the girl comes in eventually with earphones on and looks at me, rolls her eyes, and flops on the couch, and did not want to be there, as obvious. And so I went and greeted her. She rolled her eyes again. Anyway, we went upstairs to the room, and the mother was very distraught. Parents had divorced. Father had been taken up with somebody else. The girl knew about all that. And anyway, so I looked at them and I thought, there's no way we're going to start off with best hopes because the kid is not in here. So I looked over at the mom and said, I want to do something different as we start out today. I'd like for you to think back for a few minutes about some things that you just love about your daughter, some wonderful things about her that you just adore. And she looked over at her and she said, oh, she has just been the best sister during this divorce. She's been this. I said, what else is it about her? And she kept on going and going and going. And then I noticed that the girl who had been listening to her CD, I think it was something like it was, stopped listening to it and started looking over at mom. And I said, okay, great. Thank you, mom. Daughter, would you mind telling me some things about mom that you really admire? And she took her earphones out and she said, my mom is the strongest woman I've ever met, but she's got a sucky life. That's exactly what she said. Sucky life. And she said, my dad cheats on her. She has to get 2 jobs to support my brother and myself. She's got a sucky life. And she says, she's just amazing. And mother looks over her and she starts crying. And daughter looks at mother. And anyway, from there, we went into, so what can we talk about today that would begin to make things better for both of you? So I think you have to, I think a skill you got to get to is also how do they walk into your room? And it's the joining thing, sure. But when they come in that against being there, you got to cooperate with it.
You got to start where the client is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We get that a lot with our clients because obviously the families, the parents are either self-referring to us or we have had a very quick conversation beforehand. And, we do get the teenagers that are quite reluctant to be there. But it's exactly what you said. It's noticing something about them that you appreciate yourself. And then start just having that conversation to get to know them and drawing out their strengths and what they admire about each other. And just taking that time, even if it needs 1 or 2 sessions to do that.
Oh, yeah.
Most of the time you can do that in 10 minutes. But sometimes that can take a few sessions, and you know what? Just go with it at their own pace.
Something I learned a long time ago is one of the best ways to do effective brief therapy is to go slow at first.
Very slow. Yeah, you got to get a direction. And if you don't have a direction, forget it. It's not going to, nobody's going to.
Another thing, again, with family members coming in with different defined problems, that being the other person needs to change. One problem they usually can agree upon is they don't like the status of their relationship or the family. So you can define it at a higher level and say conflict. And Linda, I know you've written about integrating solution, focus, and narrative. And so with conflict, then you can externalize conflict.
You can.
I mean, they see the other as the problem, but one they agree upon is that conflict has taken over their relationship, and they don't like that.
No,
and they want things to get along better, but you can externalize that. Another theoretical approach I like to use, or kind of sprinkle in for me, the foundation is solution focus, then narrative, but also structural family therapy is where you have people talk to each other in session. You provide a safe place for them to have conversations with each other that they should be having at home, but they're not. And to me, that is changing a pattern in the session. And but it's still strength based, because you have this fundamental belief that they can do this. You don't need to tell them what to say or how to say it or what the solution should be. You give them a safe place to talk to each other and really get them out of their comfort zone. You have to be comfortable. You have to be comfortable with people being out of their comfort zone.
Yeah. I think
this kind of work.
One of the first things that I do with them is I always do the Genogram family tree. And sometimes children are really fascinated by it. They didn't know that they had these different relations. And they end up having something in common with each other that becomes alive. And then you can use that family tree at every session, just have it on the wall.
Exactly.
And you can refer back to it. You can think about different relations, and it makes you be creative about a problem that that person might be able to help, or, how about this? And it also helps you, as Gil says, look at different patterns that have happened in families and any themes. Obviously death comes up as well, and so that's really helpful as a tool to deal with that.
It actually reminds me of a case that Joe had. Joe was the one with the blended family.
Oh yeah.
Where were they from? South Africa?
I think so.
And they just kept bickering, and Joe just kept persevering every Saturday, just persevering. And one was happy, one wasn't happy. There'd be tears, and there was always this talk of the elephant in the room. And Joe just got really fed up one day and said, "What is it about this family that's worth fighting for?"
Oh, that's a good one.
And they just all stopped. And thank goodness I was there to witness it. They just all stopped. Because it was almost like saying, why don't you just give up? And then they started fighting to find a solution to get along. And it was absolutely
fantastic.
Amazing.
Yeah, and
what
it was
happened
almost,
after that, Joe?
It was like, they would say, well, they're my family and I'm going to have a lifelong relationship with them, and I want it to be, do you know what I mean? So it started to change the whole focus of it. But
fantastic.
Before that, it was pretty much, where you get to that point where you think, I'm asking the wrong questions. Obviously, there's something not working here.
Right.
And you just say, for God's sake. And going back to what you were saying earlier about, I have a family that come and just seem to want to talk about the previous argument because they can't have it at home because it becomes too violent. So you're almost like a bystander and replaying this this thing, and and when they
But-
left last time,
But for it to
Yeah.
be therapeutic, they have to talk about it in a different way.
right? But
You don't want them just rehashing,
Yeah.
arguing, talking about it the same way they had to do at home.
Yeah. But the thing is, I don't think they've even got the courage to talk about it at home. They
Yeah.
wait till they come. They wait till they come here, and then I have to sit there and think, "Oh God, really? Okay." and that happened, and that happened. So when they left last time, I said, "Don't come back until you come back with a solution, because it's too stressful for me, and I get it may be helping you to offload, but where are we going with this?"
At the Leeds Family Therapy Conference, Joe, it's really interesting. You should bring that up. There was quite a well-known therapist who was doing a talk called Jed Smith, and he says, "I don't do detail. I don't do detail. I just want to know what's under it. What is the problem here?" Because obviously, an argument, there's something under the argument. I feel misunderstood. I feel, and that's the real theme that we're trying to grapple with. So, yeah.
I've done that too, Joe, with families or mostly couples and individuals too, when they just cannot seem to, they still go backwards all the time. And when I remember a couple that I would say, how about today? What we're going to do is I'm not going to schedule the next session, but what I'd like you to do between now and whenever we do meet again is to decide what you want. And once you do, then give me a call and I will see you within a day. And
Nice.
Yeah. And a couple did that. A couple of them did that. Because they can argue at home. Why pay to argue in front of me, And so I like what you did. Yeah.
Yeah.
Laura, you had mentioned the Genogram. I'm glad you brought that up. And there's some publication, a little literature on using solution-focused therapy with Genogram and narrative. And you can still do that from sort of a strength-based, solution-focused narrative perspective. A couple of questions I found helpful along those lines is to ask someone, who in your family, after you get the family diagram and all that, who in your family has given you the best advice so far? And another one is, who in your family has had a similar problem like this and has been able to successfully deal with it? And almost always they have an affirmative answer to that. And so that sort of frames the whole three-generational family as having resources and having answers and solutions.
Have you seen Bruce Keel's solution-focused Genogram?
Yes, I have.
I'll never forget when he presented that at AAMFT so many years ago. That room was packed. I think he had like 300 people. And they were standing
really
just to see another way, and it was just beautiful.
Yeah.
What did you say his name was, Linda?
Bruce Keel. And I'm looking at where I can put it.
I think it's Keuhl.
Yes, something like that. It's kind of an odd name, but if you put if you Google solution-focused Genogram, Bruce Keel or Bruce, you'll probably come up. Yeah, he is the author and creator of it. It's just wonderful.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah.
So so often sometimes our families may come with an aunt, an uncle, a grandparent, different generations, and I'm looking at you, Linda, because now you're a grandma.
Yeah.
How is it different? How would because often we find that the grandparents are so much more forgiving, maybe more sort of having that time, and the parent looking at this is saying, well, you would have never done with me when I was a kid. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, so how do we I guess involve all the generations and get them working in the same way, I suppose?
Oh gosh, what a great question. I'm gonna have to think about that. I haven't had the chance much to do that because Archer, my grandson, is 1, and they live 1,400 miles away from me in Los Angeles. But so I'm trying to get my head around your question. What do you say when when
Well, Gil's grandson is a lot older. Gil, has there ever been a time where there's been a little bit of conflict, and how do you get around that?
I'm not really sure. Let's see. I know it's come up. I'll talk about that off camera.
Well, one thing I have learned as being a grandparent is that, number one, bringing babies into the world today are very different than they were 42 years ago when I had my first one. So what I learned to do was Jill really sit back and let Kelly show me how she was going to do this, and just say, well, you just let me know how I can help you.
Yeah.
I don't want to be that grandma who says, oh, you're doing it wrong. But I think the same thing, I think one thing is, I think when you get older and you see somebody, if my grandson does do something, I might be a little softer. I'll follow what my kids want me to do, when he's with me, but I might give in a little bit. I think you have a different perspective. It's not like, he's going to be warped for life because he had chocolate, Instead, you'll begin to kind of be a little softer about the fact that, I can see your point, but since this is the only time he's had chocolate in his entire life, and he's 10, I think you'll be okay. I think you get a little softer about it. Also because you've kind of matured to the fact you're not wigging out about everything they do. You kind of see that they'll turn out okay if you love them and you're supportive.
In my mind, as a grandparent, you have a license to spoil.
Oh,
not really.
Official license.
Yeah. No, I have just one daughter and one grandson, and my daughter and son-in-law have done a really good job of parenting. And they're over the years. My grandson is 18 now, senior in high school, and from time to time they have consulted with me, asked my input on some things. I really try to restrain myself from giving unsolicited advice. But over the years, especially again the last 15 years, I've been doing life supervision at this agency called the Buckeye Ranch. We've seen a lot of families where grandparents are raising the kids, and dad may be in prison or just on the streets on drugs. Same with mom. So the grandparents get legal custody. But sometimes we've had cases where at least usually it's the mom gets clean and sober. She doesn't have custody, but she's still involved with their lives.
Right.
But even in two-parent families or in divorced families, a universal theme, and I'm not sure how solution-focused, this is more seen through my structural family therapy lens, is kids need consistency. And what I have found so often, our kids are getting inconsistent messages from parents or parent figures and caretakers, also in school settings. So I talked about, like using a structural lens and having the parents or caretakers talk to each other in the session, or sometimes it's a parent and a kid, but the caretakers, providing them a safe place to get on the same page about expectations and consequences. And again, not telling them what those should be, giving them a safe place for them to negotiate and work that out.
Yeah. Joe, I just thought about, thanks. Joe, I just thought about a question I would ask.
Oh, good.
Of a grandparent. And maybe the grandparents in the session with the kid, or maybe the grandparents in the session with their son, daughter, and grandchild. I think I would, if the grandparent had a better relationship, which is often the case sometimes with the grandchild than the parent did, I might ask that grandparent, tell me what you wished your daughter knew about your grandson that you discovered by being with him during the summer. What do you wish she knew? What do you wish your son recognized about the grandson? Because again, grandparents are going to have a different lens than parents would have. So I might ask a question like that. I might ask that.
Write that down, Ayse. We're stealing that one.
I was hoping you write it down. Hold on.
Oh God. and I think there's always that that other side of the coin where the parent says, yeah, it's all right for you. You only see them once a month. You don't have to live with them. Do you know what I mean? So it's a tricky one, but yeah, I love that. I love that question.
Yeah. Yeah. In a way, the grandparents lucky because she can see
Yeah.
things because she doesn't see the everyday stuff, but she goes above it and beyond and sees who they really are. You know,
Yeah.
the parents don't see. Maybe.
Oh, wicked.
Yeah.
I'm still waiting, Linda. I don't know what my boys are doing, but I think grandparenthood is going to pass me by somehow.
I know. I waited a long time too, but
Yeah.
Well, let me pose a question or an issue to the group then. What about the issue of usually father involvement or grandfather involvement?
Good question, Gil.
in what way, Gil?
Well, too often we start off with them not being involved.
Yeah, we do.
So what are ways of addressing that? Or not? Does it have to be addressed?
I'd ask the kids. Ask the kids in there. People in there. Do you want Dad to come? What would you suggest as a way to maybe get him to come?
Yeah.
What could I do, if anything, that might help you get him to come? You know, that would be. I'd ask them first before.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
I think yeah. Sorry, go on, Laura.
No, often they say no. And more often than not, they say no. And I had an interesting conversation with a girl yesterday, and I said she was talking very fondly about her dad. Mum and dad are separated, and I said, "How about we invite him to these sessions?" And she said, "Oh no, he'd be too worried, and he takes medication." So she was really worried about how he would respond to talking. But I said, "But how about we involve him and tell him, all the things that you're doing that are so good at the moment." She said, "Oh yeah, he really likes to hear that." So you have to sort of find a window. But it is true, there's this concept that men don't talk, and men find it scary to talk. And why would they want to sit in a room and talk to us like this? And I think that's something, that's certainly something I would do some study on if I was to do my MA in family therapy. That would be my special interest, because I think, men are key, obviously, in all of this. And sometimes it's hard for them to utter things to their kids and their ex-partners, partners. And that's, again, where the magic comes, when you can actually get them to do that.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of times they don't get involved because they're not asked.
That's absolutely true.
You have to invite them.
Yeah.
And sometimes pursue them a little bit. But over the years, there have been cases where, according to family systems here, if you can just get some small change going, let's say between the female caretaker, mother, grandmother, foster mother, with a child, and they stick with it, that can be enough. But sometimes it's not. So over the years, sometimes the difference maker I've seen after a few sessions, getting the father or grandfather involved. And not that they have to come for every session after that, but just getting involved. Sometimes their work schedule does prevent that legitimately. Sometimes not, But sometimes just the fact that they are now involved, I've seen that to really turn things around in a positive direction.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think what we find often, because of a lot of the families that we work with, there would be domestic abuse.
Oh yeah.
So what we're finding is, although there's no legal definition for it, what we would call parental alienation.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
Where one is deliberately saying the other one's no good, or turning the child against the other one. So that's kind of where with this new funding that we've had, is looking at how we can engage those parents. Can we get to a point where your hatred towards each other is less than your love for your kid? Do you know what I mean? And how do we work towards that? Because often families will say he's been to his mum's or his dad's this weekend, he's come home and his behaviour's off the chart. And it's getting those involved when there's so much animosity between the adults, and getting them to realise that actually this isn't about you. I'm sorry, but it's about your child. Oh, Linda's got her hand up. Yeah, yes, Linda.
You reminded me of something. So I hope it's okay if I mention another question to you. A long time ago, I was working with Terry Hargrave, who is a family of origin therapist. He did some contextual family therapy. Budgen was who he studied under, and he wanted to get his work briefer, and I wanted to add emotion to mine. So he and I worked together, and we worked with several clients. And one question we came up with, I just want to give him credit for this because he helped me compose this question, was to ask parents whenever, like you're describing, Joe, that are so, quote, I call them passionate. They don't want to be there. They're furious at each other. They don't want to work together. And I usually, if I see that a lot of that going on, and the child is not in the room at this point, usually, I ask them to think about this question. So I want you to go 20 years into the future. 20 years into the future, your son or daughter is now 37, let's say. And I walk up to them and I ask them, what was it like for you when you were 17 with your mom and dad, even though they were divorced? What was it like? And then I look at the parents and I ask them, I want you to think about what it is you hope your son will tell me. And usually the room gets really quiet. And after that question, I just look at them and say, between now and when I see you again, I'd like for you to do something you hope your 17-year-old son appreciates and remembers 20 years from now. And that's saved my life a few times. But that question,
that's great. Yeah,
it really has. And I mean, I use it in my own life with our children.
Yeah.
How do I want them to call me? Do I want them to text me? Then what do I need to be doing? So they remember things fondly, and that's helped a lot with.
That is such a powerful question, and we tend to ask that question when we're delivering workshops. The first session is, imagining 10 years time. What would your life? You're hoping your life. How would you hope that your child would describe you?
Right. Exactly.
And just giving them the moment to really think about it.
Yeah.
And then scale themselves.
Oh, love that. I'm gonna add that next
I just
time.
ask them to scale themselves, and then what is it that you can do between now and next week to. And it's amazing because you can almost hear their brain ticking away.
You can, and you see their faces change from scorn and anger. Oh.
We've got one written down. Love it.
Mark has asked us to help him with a case. So Mark is saying, what if the father was fed up with his son and told him, I'm not going to be involved anymore? Parents are still together with more younger children, just hoping for some inspiration here.
Right. Okay. Well, I mean, the obvious question for me is, so what would it take for you to be more involved, and what difference would that make? Because often we hear it quite often where one of the parents has almost been on the sideline and someone else has done all the disciplining, and this parent is just basically there to pick up the pieces. They don't feel part of the process. And if you were to give up on your son, how do you feel what benefit would that have for him in the future? Because, there's no matter how much we hate our parents, they're still part of us. There's that connection, regardless. There's that connection, and if I'm putting down the other parent, I'm putting down part of them because they feel that connection. So what needs to change for you to be more involved? And if you were more involved, what difference do you think that would make to your son? Because I'm sure he doesn't want you to abandon him, because that's what it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, if that would happen in a session, Joe, I love your answers. If that were to happen in a session where the father said, I'm not going to be involved anymore, and I could tell that it was upsetting the kid, I'd be curious by asking the dad, it sounds like that's really important for you to tell him. What would it take? I mean, what could he begin to do on a small scale, Dad, that would make you be slightly involved? Maybe not just slightly involved, or help you be less fed up with him. What could he begin to do? And then look at the kid as the dad talks about. Is it okay? Would you be willing to try that out? Yeah, maybe. What could your dad do that would encourage you to try that out? Back and forth, like Elliot Connie talks about that, like a tennis ball, back and forth, back and forth. But I wouldn't let the dad off the hook too easy.
No, I
No.
wouldn't either. I'd want to find out what has the dad done in trying to have a good relationship with his son. That hasn't worked. What has he tried over and over again? That's a pattern, interactional pattern right there. And the MRI, the Mental Research Institute approach to strategic therapy refer to that as first order change. What do people do over and over again that's not working? That's a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
So that's a pattern that would change. Now, another question along those lines that I've also found helpful most of the time and every time is, what have you thought about trying but haven't? And often the very thing that would be helpful they've thought about but they haven't. And then the solution focused question I asked, so you want to have a better, obviously he's given up on his son, but there's frustration there because he wants to have a better relationship with his son, but it's not happening. He feels like the son is not doing his part. So I'd look for past exceptions. When was the last time you spent good time with your son?
Yeah.
And now that may have been a year ago, may have been 3 years. I don't know, but I found when you look for those past exceptions, people's moods shift. They remember that, and their face lights up a little bit as they're recalling that last time they had some positive time with that person.
Yeah. So one thing that you're talking about, Gil, is the MRI. So what is the problem? Let's analyze that. What are you doing to solve it? What's not working? Whereas the SF approach is, when was the last time that you felt that you wanted to be involved more?
Well, and in fact, if their feet are on the floor in your office and the dad is saying, I don't want to be involved in your life, something is there because they're feet on the floor.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So what is it that brought you here today?
Yeah.
Even though you've just said this, what is it about your son that still brought you here?
Oh, yeah.
Well, guys, I'm really sorry, but I need to stop you all there. This has been a very interesting conversation.
We've got another couple hours of conversation here.
Because I wanted to ask Laura about the T team, but maybe next time, and Gil on his what is this? The family therapy for treating trauma. Maybe that's something that's another discussion.
So that can be part 2.
Yes.
We can have a part 2 with the same guests, and maybe between now and next time we meet, we kind of look around for some case studies, and
That's
see
a good idea.
and have a conversation of, is there anything that we could have done differently, and the successes. Because I think talking about what's gone well and even better if is really, really important, and also inspires people to really look at themselves and reflect on their practice and the importance of that, because that's just as important as being in the therapy room.
Yeah.
So in closing, it would be safe to say that all of us here agree that when you have a child or an adolescent who's been diagnosed or has the presenting problem, that family therapy is called for rather than individual child therapy.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would agree with anything you say, Gil.
Yeah. When
you want my PayPal account so send me some money?
when we work with a family, Gil, which I personally have found so much more rewarding than when I was mentoring, just one-to-one. But also, if the child comes up that there's issues at school, then we will contact the school and see if we can work with the school and that child, so that we're going from 2 fronts rather than just one. Because if we can get the family life ticking along lovely, but the school for some reason it's all going wrong, we're batting that ball backwards and forwards, but we're not batting from the same side of the net. This is what Steve, was it Steve? Yeah. Oh, guys, I love you lot. I'm getting all emotional. Aisha's nodding her head. Oh my God, he's got to drive me home.
But thank you very much to all our guests.
Well,
Thank
thanks
you
for
very much.
organizing that.
having us. Thank you for having us. And
There will be a part 2.
Mm.
Okay.
Everyone will receive an email tomorrow with a new date. And I hope, I know from all the feedback and the private messages I've been receiving that everyone has found this quite useful and inspiring. So thank you for that. So join us for another FBS chat next week, where we do have another guest joining us. And just stay safe, and just remember, everyone's part of the solution. So work
Right.
together to find the
That's right.
solution. Stop dwelling on the
Absolutely.
problem.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
thank you, Joe. Thank
If
you,
my
Aisha.
guests can stay behind, but I know you're going out,
She's got a birthday
Laura,
party.
so you shoot off, and I will have a quick
Are you-
chat with Linda and Gil.
All right, Laura, nice meeting you.
Yeah,
Look
you
forward
too.
to-
And I hope to see you both again. Well,
Yeah,
see
same
you all
here.
again.
Yeah.
Thank you for your inspirational words and teachings.
And your work too. It's important in schools that you're doing in UK too. Thank
Yeah.
you for doing that.
Definitely.
See you later, everyone.
Okay.